Bismillah walhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillahi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Allahumma allimna ma yanfa'una wa anfa'na bima 'allamtana wa zidna ilman rabbal alameen. Allahumma a'inna ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husni ibadatik. Amma ba'd. So ibnalqayyim rahimahullah continues with the presentation of the major sins, explaining why they are major and why they are very problematic and disastrous. So as we said, he's presenting the whole picture so that a person understands the full effect, the negative effect of these sins. Because if a person looks from their own vantage point, meaning only from my own desire, my own benefit, my own harm, they may not see something as major, especially immediately. But if they look at it holistically, meaning how it doesn't just affect him, but affects everybody, and it's not just about the now, the here and now, but the future as well, then you'll understand the full gravity of that sin, right? So here he's going to be talking about a Zina. So we finished talking about killing people, and we understood why that is a problem. He wants here to talk about a Zina, and he again presenting the whole picture. وَلَمَّا كَانَتْ مَفْسَدَةُ الزِّنَا مِنْ أَعْظَمِ الْمَفَاسِدِ. He says, because the harm of zina is among the greatest of harms, وَهِيَ مُنَافِيَةٌ لِمَصْلَحَةِ نِظَامِ الْعَالَمِ, and it runs contradictory to the purpose of preserving the order of this universe, the order of the world that we live in. So Allah Azza wa Jal wanted this world to exist in order, not in chaos, not where anybody can do whatever they want or attack whomever they want. Allah Azza wa Jal wanted a specific order and harmony, right, to the people. And that's why Allah Azza wa Jal revealed His Sharia. And that's why Allah prohibited what He had prohibited. So there is this maslahah, there is this benefit of harmonious living, where there is love between people and understanding and cooperation. Because if you don't have it, people will start what? Killing each other and stealing from each other and oppressing each other. So He says that's not what Allah Azza wa Jal wants from His Sharia and from His creation. He created for a harmony, and He revealed His Sharia for harmony. So He says zina runs opposite to that, which is, what does it do? Yani, what does Allah want it to do? And then zina does the opposite. قال حفظ الأنساب, protecting lineages. وحماية الفروج, safeguarding the private parts. وصيانة الحرمات, and protecting what is sanctified, what is inviolable, what should be protected here in terms of honor. So the hurma here, the hurma of your family, the honor of your family, meaning you have a spouse, you have a child, you have a sister, you have a mother, and they deserve respect. So they're not violated, they are not attacked, they're not preyed on. So there's this hurma. So people know that they should not be touched, and also you shouldn't touch what is sacred in other families. وَتَوَقِّي مَا يُوقِعُ أَعْظَمَ الْعَدَاوَةِ وَالْبَغْضَاءِ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. It says, and also avoiding what will lead to the greatest enmity and hatred among people. مِنْ إِفْسَادِ كُلِّ مِنْهُمْ امْرَأَةَ صَاحِبِهِ وَابْنَتِهِ وَأُخْتِهِ وَأُمِّهِ. He says, avoiding harm, avoiding what leads to the greatest enmity, which is what? Corrupting the spouse of so-and-so, the sister of so-and-so, the daughter of so-and-so, the mother of so-and-so, by sleeping with her. So that's a violation. So he says, when you do this to someone's spouse, how would they feel? They want to kill you, right? And so that leads to the greatest harm. You feel that injury. You feel that violation. So it will create hatred among people. قال وفي ذلك خراب العالم. And he says, and because of this, that will lead to the ruin of this world. And because of all of these ills, he says, this was the right the sin right after killing people in gravity. Right? He says that's why Allah Azza wa Jal joined them in His book, and that's why the Prophet ﷺ joined them in his hadith. The ayahs and the hadiths that we've talked about, meaning killing people right after comes fornication, adultery, and zina. He says, قال الإمام أحمد ولا أعلم بعد قتل النفس شيئا أعظم من الزنا. He says, I do not know of a greater sin right after killing someone than zina. Right? And that is interesting, because if you were to ask people, in fact, universally, what do you think about killing people? Like anybody in the world today, what do you think about killing people? They say absolutely a crime. In fact, you will have treaties and conventions against that. Even though those who sign those treaties are hypocrites when it comes to them, they will sign, then they will kill. But at least verbally they will say what? We agree that this is wrong. This is a crime. You're not going to find anyone who's going to say otherwise, right? But when it comes to zina, you're not going to find that consensus, right? Meaning zina has slipped out of the area of the haram, the area of the prohibited, the area of the reprehensible, despicable acts of humanity. Slipped out, and now it's among the acceptable. Murder is not. Zina is. That's more common, more acceptable. And we can say not only is that the case in Western non-Muslim countries or Eastern non-Muslim countries, but also to an extent in Muslim countries as well, that consumes a media that normalizes that behavior, right? Even the media sometimes that is produced within the country itself, that is a Muslim country, will normalize either that behavior or the introductions to that behavior, like dating and going out and having a boyfriend and a girlfriend and all of these things. The introductions are acceptable. And worldwide, it is not condemnable. So it's interesting how this is the greatest sin right after murdering people, yet it's no longer a sin in the eyes of a lot of people. And if you go back to the harm of zina, and why the reason why we need kind of to emphasize this is that it is an uphill battle trying to convince people today that this is wrong, right? And again, even among Muslims sometimes. So if you don't understand why it's wrong, you may have trouble communicating that or accepting it. So when he says حفظ الأنساب, right, that this is an objective of the Sharia to preserve the lineages. You may wonder, why do you want to preserve the lineage? Because if you don't know who is related to whom, a person can end up sleeping with his sister, right? Or with his mother, or with his aunt, or with his daughter. Because you don't know who fathered who. Who's related to who. And that is a breakdown of order in society, right? So he says, this is hifdhul ansab. You want to know who belongs to whom, so that you know whom to avoid and whom you can marry and whom you cannot. So that is one. So we're going to count some of the, and I'm saying some of the harms of zina, because there may be things that are beyond what we talk about. You may know them, or they may reveal themselves later. قال وحماية الفروج, safeguarding the private parts. Because if you don't safeguard the private part, what happens? At least what you're going to have is physical illnesses, biological illnesses that will spread among people. And we've mentioned the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which is that when zina is widespread, it is common, what happens? That new diseases will spread. You know, as a natural consequence of what is happening. So that, if you safeguard your desire, you protect yourself and you protect society. If you let your desire run rampant, you'll be sick. You'll make them sick. Society becomes sick. But it's not also, I mean, if you were talking about diseases and we're talking about sickness, it's not also or only the physical sickness, but it's also sickness in character or psychological sickness as well, that zina will breed. And that is something that you may not think about, but it is there. Yani, think of any sin. If you keep practicing that sin, regardless of what that sin is, what is the sin going to give you? Great character, nobility, or the opposite? The opposite for sure, because Allah Azza wa Jal hates it. And that's the arena of shaitan. So you're going to develop the worst of character. So if you think about just zina itself, where you are cheating on someone, or sneaking behind their back, or lying to them, that's what zina is about, isn't it? So you're going to sleep with someone's wife, someone's husband, someone's daughter behind their back, so you are habitually learning to lie, learning to cover up those mistakes, learning to cheat, and becoming what? Crafty at it, to hide your tracks so that no one will find you, and to keep doing it, and doing it, and doing it without being caught. Right? So it will breed into that person. Okay, whether we can decipher how it does this or not, but it will make the person worse as a human being. So you will not find a person who will commit acts that Allah Azza wa Jal hates, who will be of impeccable character. He may have some good qualities in him, but it's not because of that zina. Zina is destroying that quality. He may have had this quality because of a religious upbringing, or because of good parents, or because of a general influence in society. But zina itself will ruin his character, will ruin his reputation, and will degrade him and degrade all of society. So think of a society that sees zina or any other sin as something that is acceptable, and you know that they are being downgraded gradually in character, until they will turn into literally or figuratively animals who will eat each other. Because this is what it is. You see a good person, you see a beautiful person, a beautiful man, a beautiful woman, you just want to sleep with them. And that carnivorous type of behavior that I just want and I need to have regardless of consequences, that is what? That is terrible character. So he says, himayatul furuj, safeguarding the private parts physically, but also psychologically. What happens to you psychologically when someone sleeps with you and then forgets about you? He just wanted that moment, right? What does that do to a female who could stay with a male for a year or 2 years, and then he says, sorry, I'm done with you? Or a female that does that to a male. In a marriage, you have a commitment, right? You're going in knowing that this person is committed to me, I'm committed to them. They're not likely to leave if they see someone more beautiful or more handsome, or they're not going to do this. But with zina, there is no commitment at all. There's anxiety. And then they just let go of you and they say goodbye. I found somebody younger or hotter or better or richer, whatever it is. Or I'm just simply tired of you. So what does that do to you psychologically as you move from one relationship to the other, from one encounter to the other? What does that do to you? Obviously, it destroys you and it ruins you. And if you were to have a child, then how you're going to raise that child will be affected by that psychological damage that you have. And then he says, siyanatul hurumat, protecting your wife, protecting your mother, feeling protective. That is lost as well, right? So there's no jealousy, and I'm talking about the praised type of jealousy where you are protective of, you want to defend your hurumat, your family, your daughter from harm, your wife from harm, your mother from harm, your sister from harm. Now just do whatever you want. Go out with whomever you want. So that jealousy is destroyed, right? Especially if the female assumes, well, it's my right. As you do it, I'm going to do it, right? And so that is lost. Jealousy is lost. And then, of course, enmity between people. Add to it also that zina will eventually unravel society by destroying the family, right? And if you think about it, what is the thing? And maybe it's sometimes useful to think about these things even though they're a little bit abstract, but you can kind of bring them back home so that you could sort of observe them in society. What keeps a society a society? Like, think about it. The society that you live in right now, whatever that society might be. What keeps those people together so that they could say, we're one? Family is the basic structure, if you think about it. Because if you think to yourself, if you say to yourself, I'm just floating in life as an individual who does whatever he wants, that's not a society. Right? Because society will say, well, no, we're together. We have things in common, right? And you have obligations and you have rights. He said, but what keeps me attached to this person or to that person? There must be some commonalities. So if you think about, if society is simply going to be reduced to a number of individuals detached from each other, that society will evaporate. You need a basic structure to keep them together, right? What is the structure that keeps, the basic structure that will never go away, that keeps people together? It is when you bring a male and a female and they have family and they feel responsible for that family. So they do whatever they can to protect it, to provide for it, to enrich it. And then this family needs another family and another family and another family in order to thrive, in order to prosper, in order to do what they need to do, right? Now, society to function needs a family. That's the basic structure. Now, introduce Zina, where you don't need to have a family, right? What happens? Society starts to decay. Society really starts to decay. No bonds anymore, no permanent bonds. And you don't need to have children. And you don't have children, what happens to you? Society ends, right? You must have enough children to replace those who will die. If you don't have them, then what's going to happen? Not enough money, right? So why do you think people, countries, governments, they pay those who have children? Like, why? It doesn't make sense, right? Why do they pay you if you have children? Like in Japan and Korea, right? They have these programs. What do they pay you to have children? Because they realize that if you don't have children, the society will collapse. We need people who will work, who will bring income, who will bring money, but also a workforce. Just basic economics, right? You need a workforce. If you don't have enough workforce, what is going to happen? The society will be bankrupt. So we need money. Why do you think governments open their doors for immigrants? Yeah, because the same thing, you need a workforce. If you don't have a workforce, because you yourself are not producing enough, isn't it? You're not producing enough. So where does this come from? That comes really from Zina, if you want to think about it. Because there's no family, there's no traditional family. They're not together long enough or early enough for them to have children. And when they are together, they don't want to have children. And if they want to have children, they only want to have one or two, and that which is not enough. It's like it needs to be 2 point a fraction of something. You need at least 3 for the replace. So what's interesting is that when you spread zina like that, and also zina without consequences, right? Zina without consequences. Not only that there is no punishment, or there is no societal condemnation of it. There's no disgrace. Right? Previously there was. But there are no physical consequences in terms of you don't get pregnant anymore. One of the things that would deter a person from committing zina is what? The prospect of having a child out of wedlock, especially if you're female. Right? That's why the price of zina is higher, and the female pays a higher price for zina than a male. Because of 2 things, virginity and the child, pregnancy. Because a male does not have to suffer. A male does not lose his virginity, not visibly. A female does. And then the female could end up with what? A child. And that's disgraceful, but also a burden. So what did they do to encourage zina or make it consequence-free? Abortion, right? And birth control pills. Okay? And they frame it as autonomy. as a woman's right. What is the right there? For you not to have child. Meaning, in a sense, if you think about it and how it developed, is for you to practice zina without no consequence, no repercussion. And when that happens, the door is open. Right? And which leads to abortion. The abortion is not about medical necessity. If it was, it would not be a debate. Abortion is about what? The right to dispose of your child whenever you feel like. Which comes from what? Primarily that, zina. So you think about it, all of these things together, that is what Allah Azza wa Jalla is talking about. That's the destruction of the individual, the destruction of the family, and destruction of society. Physically, psychologically, emotionally, and then religiously. So that's the terrible price of zina, right? And by no means am I saying that this is the only harm of zina. There might be much more. And ibnalqayyim rahimahullah, he continues and he says, Allah Azza wa Jal confirmed this in the Quran, and that's the ayah that we've mentioned before. And he says he joined it with shirk and murdering people and made the punishment for that, as he described in the Quran, incredible punishment and eternity in hellfire, etc., as we said. And he said, subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا إِنَّهُ كَانَ فَاحِشَةً وَسَاءَ سَبِيلًا. He says, do not come close to zina. إِنَّهُ, indeed, it is a fahisha, an obscenity, and it is a bad path, an evil path. So he says, rahimahullah, he says, it is fuhsh. He called it fuhsh. And he says, the fuhsh is what? The thing that is so harmful that it reached the height or ultimate in harm and obscenity. This is the fahish. Qabih, ugly, but it's maximal in its ugliness. And that is what fahish. Its fuhsh is what? Evident in itself to anyone who's looking at it. Now he's not talking here, subhanAllah, about the fitrah of a lot of people that has shifted and was corrupted, so they don't see it as ugly. But he says for the person who has the proper fitrah, you cannot look at it, especially from afar. Holistically again, because a person what? Could long for zina because he's what? He has that desire for it. So he's looking at it what? With a very limited scope. I just want to do it because I love her. Or I'm simply, have this desire. I just need to fulfill it, so it's good. So he just wants to do it for that. That's very limited. Is that if you expand how you're looking at it, so that you not only look at it through your eyes, but the eyes of your sister, and the eyes of your potential wife, and the eyes of your daughter, and the eyes of a lot of young men and a lot of young women, then tell me that this is good. Right? You know how some people, and this is how kind of we are contradictory, you would do things yourself, but you will never let your son do them. Right? Or if it's not your son, your younger brother. You will not, like you could smoke, but you never let him smoke. You could take drugs, but you'll never let him take drugs. Why? Because you know what? In itself it's wrong, even if you justify it for yourself, but you know that not you shouldn't touch it, because I know it's wrong. So you don't look at it through your eyes only, you look at it through everybody else's eye, especially those that you love and you want to protect, and you'll understand whether this is right or wrong. Right? So he said, كما ذكر البخاري, he says that this is something that is ugly, that even some animals, or maybe many animals, even when they look at it, they will look at it with contempt. He says, as Al-Bukhari has mentioned, that Amr ibn Maymun al-Awdi, he says, I saw in Jahiliyyah a monkey committing zina with a female monkey. He says, the monkeys then gathered and they stoned them to death. Right? So that's his observation. That doesn't mean that all monkeys behave in that way. It doesn't mean that all animals behave in that way. But what he's doing here, radiyallahu anhu, is what? He's telling you what? He said, it is haram, our fitrah says it's wrong. Allah Azza wa Jal says it's wrong. He says, even saw some animals, and they know that it's wrong. Now, of course, it doesn't mean all animals. And what's interesting here, subhanAllah, this made me think about something. The Sahabi here, radiyallahu anhu, he's going top bottom and not bottom top. What I mean by that is what? He says, we know this is wrong. And then he's looking at maybe some animals also have that behavior or not. He's not trying to copy the animals. Because some people today, what they'll do is what? Go bottom up, which is what? Look for a behavior among animals to justify it among humans. Because when you find that it's true among animals, it is what? Natural. Because we've come from animals after all, right? So if you could find specifically, they were looking for some homosexual behavior among animals to say what? That if they do it, then it's natural among us. Suppose you found it among some animals, and then what? You copy them? There are a lot of other animal behavior that you really shouldn't copy. Are you going to copy everything that they do in the name that it's natural? Some of them kill their young. You want to do that? Right? Or their elders. Do you want to do that? You're not going to do that. So you understand the standards that you have are very different than those of animals. They don't have the Sharia that you have. They don't have the Quran that you have. But he's going top bottom, meaning that if it is confirmed among some animals, then it just adds to the evidence that we have. But even if it's not, even if somebody comes and said, this is a fluke, this is not right, it doesn't really matter, because what we have is the Sharia that tells us right and wrong. And he says, وَلَمَّا كَانَ نِكَاحُ أَزْوَاجِ الْأَبَاءِ مِنْ أَقْبَاحِ. He says, and also, in addition, a specific facet of it, which is that marrying the father's wife, the stepmother, as they would call her. He says, because that, which is the people in Jahiliyyah, they used to do it before Islam. He says, because this is uglier, Allah Azza wa Jal criticized it more by saying, إِنَّهُ كَانَ فَاحِشَةً وَمَقْتًا وَسَاءَ سَبِيلًا. That it is a fahisha, an obscenity, and hated by Allah, and it is an evil path, because that's even worse than zina. Right? That's even worse than zina. And then he said, rahimahullah, he said, Allah Azza wa Jal have attached prosperity or success for a servant of Allah Azza wa Jal, for any human being upon, he attached it to preserving and protecting his private parts. And you will not be successful without it. Definitely, he's talking about the success in the akhirah, but you can also add extend it to success in the dunya as well. And don't be deceived by worldly success that comes and goes, right? Yani, if society had started the way it is right now, it would not have reached the heights that it is at this point. If society, Western societies, Western countries, the way that they started is the way that they are today, they would not be where they are today. But there's a constant degeneration that is taking place. That's why you see that a lot of the world today cannot generate the same science, cannot generate the same advancements. Why? Because we're busy with all the corruption that we have created. So he says success, Allah Azza wa Jalla said, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. The believers have succeeded or are successful. And then he lists all of the qualities that they have. الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ. Those who have khushu' in their salah. One of the things that Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ. Those who safeguard their private parts. So you will not be a successful, prosperous believer who's pleasing to Allah without this. Right? And فَمَنِ ابْتَغَى وَرَاءَ ذَلِكَ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْعَادُونَ. That is, if you go beyond what Allah had legislated, you are a transgressor. So he said, rahimahullah, فَمُقَاسَاتُ أَلَمِ الشَّهْوَةِ وَمُعَانَاتُهَا أَيْسَرُ مِنْ بَعْضِ ذَلِكَ. He says, being patient with the pain and resisting the pain or the urge of the shahwa is a lot easier than bearing the consequence of all of this, which is losing success and becoming a transgressor with Allah Azza wa Jal. Meaning the shahwa, resisting it is painful. He's saying this. You want to do the haram and you resist it. And your nafs is resisting you and you're resisting your nafs, and it is painful and it's not pleasant. He's saying yes, but compare it to the ultimate consequence where if you follow your desire, you will regret a lot more than and be in pain a lot more than the pain that you have today. Right? Where you would wish to say to yourself, I wish I did not do anything. If I knew it would lead me down that path, I would never have done it. It's easier just to say to yourself, you know what, forget about this and do something more useful, and then you'll forget it. Versus get into trouble committing zina and all the things that zina leads to. And he says, وَنَظِيرُ هَذَا, he says, and similar to this, he said that Allah Azza wa Jal had criticized humanity for being what? Halu'a, anxious. He says, humanity was created anxious, is not patient with either good or bad, ease or difficulty. But when he's touched, if a human being is touched with something good, he will hold and be stingy. And if something bad happens to him, he will panic. Except those whom Allah Azza wa Jal had saved, and the thing that they will need among other things to be saved from that, those who protect their private parts. And then he also goes on to say, so Allah Azza wa Jal had commanded the believers to lower their gaze, or from their gaze. يَغُضُّ مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ وَيَحْفَظُوا فُرُوجَهُمْ, and that they protect their private parts. And he told them that he is witness over what they do. Allah Azza wa Jal said, يَعْلَمُ خَائِنَةَ الْأَعْيُنِ وَمَا تُخْفِي الصُّدُورِ. He knows the deceptive look and what the hearts are hiding. The look that looks furtively at the haram without anyone noticing. He says Allah knows this. Telling you that He knows that so that you don't think that if you escape people's gaze that you've escaped Allah Azza wa Jal. That you sneak a look at the haram, that somehow you have escaped. He says Allah knows this khiyana, this betrayal, this traitorous look, He knows it. And He knows what you're thinking about as you're thinking about it, even though the person sitting right next to you doesn't know that you have planned to do something haram, that your heart is boiling with haram. He thinks that you're nice and obedient and this. He says Allah knows what is in your heart, so that be afraid of Him. And He knows when you betray Allah Azza wa Jal and people with a look, so also be aware of that. قال ولما كان مبدأ ذلك من قبل المصر جعل الأمر بغضه مقدما على حفظ الفرج. He says because the sin starts with a gaze, starts with a look before a person commits zina, because he have to see something to be attracted to it. He says He gave that command first, meaning lower your gaze and then protect your private parts, because this leads to that. Your eyes, if you let them loose, if you don't restrain them, that will lead to zina. فَإِنَّ الْحَوَادِثَ مَبْدَأُهَا مِنَ الْبَصَرِ, because incidents or disasters, let's say, they happen because of a look. Just like a fire happens because of a what? A spark. Just a spark. Just a small spark. And it can spread until it becomes a massive fire that eats everything. He says just like this small thing can produce a great fire, one small look can bring a disaster. Right? فَتَكُونُ نَظْرَةٌ ثُمَّ خَطْرَةٌ ثُمَّ خُطْوَةٌ ثُمَّ خَطِيئَةٌ. So there's a look, and then there's a thought, and then there's a pace or a step, and there's a sin. That's why it is said, مَنْ حَفِظَ هَذِهِ الْأَرْبَعَ أَحْرَزَ دِينَهُ. That's why it is said, if you protect these four, you will protect your religion. What you look at, your eyes, and then your thoughts, and then what you say, and then your steps. So what you look at, and then what you think about, and then what you say, and then your steps. قال فينبغي للعبد أن يكون بواب نفسه. You should be like a doorman. A doorman who observes or protects the door. Aware of whom you let in and whom you let out. You should be, because these are the doors he is saying. So you should be the doorman, the guard who protects these entry points into himself. يلازم الرباط على ثغورها. You protect them, just like a mujahid will protect the frontiers. You do not let anybody come in and destroy you. Right? And when ibnalqayyim rahimahullah, he's saying that this is how it starts. It starts with a look, then it develops into a thought, then it develops into an act, and then the khati'ah. He is laying out for you the progression of sin. And he's basically teaching you how to intervene to stop it. And this is essential, not only for yourself, but also if you're going to teach this to someone, or you will share this with family and you'll share this with your children. This is how it progresses, meaning that you could intervene at any point to stop the sin up until the actual performance of that sin. Even if the person had taken all the steps but has not committed the sin itself, he could still stop it. It's hard, but you can still stop it. And if you remember the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ of the three who were trapped in a cave behind a big rock, and each one of them asked Allah Azza wa Jal by things that they have done for His sake to save them and remove that big boulder. One of them, what did he say? What was the thing that he had invoked Allah Azza wa Jal with? That he had asked a relative of his for Zina. And under pressure, because she needed money, she accepted at the end. And he sat on the bed, meaning what was left? Just the act. He sat on the bed. And then she said, اتق الله ولا تفضه إلا بحقه. He says, have taqwa of Allah Azza wa Jal. Do not commit this act unless rightfully. So he gave her the money and he let go of her. He said, Ya Allah, if you know that I've done this for your sake, help us and save us. And the rock moved. So a person, subhanAllah, you could reach, because you can never say to yourself, it's too late. Right? I'm already involved. Like with this person, I'm already on the bed. On the bed, right? That's it. There's nothing left. But what you say, he says, no, you can still stop. Of course, it's difficult, right? Once you've developed, have taken all those steps, it's difficult, but not impossible. But here the intervention is important. Right? So he says at first it's a look, and he's going to go into the look. And then the thought. You could intervene at the phase of the look and stop looking. You could intervene at the phase of the thought and you can stop thinking. You can intervene at the phase of speech and stop talking about it, or taking any physical steps towards it. But any of these points is a point of intervention where you could stop it. And a Muslim, when he knows this and you know how it progresses, then you have a great tool with you. Then you can fight the shaitan more clearly and then teach people how to shaitan, because now you know how it develops. You must have the idea, and then you will develop that idea, and then you will act on it, and then you'll commit that sin. And you could trace the progression of that idea or that sin with you. No. Now I'll leave this up to you. Questions or go further? Because I don't want it to be too late. I don't want you guys to be tired. Questions? Or go a little, I mean, no, but God, you guys have to be, it's not that I favor this or that. Questions? Who wants questions? Questions? Let's go with questions, inshallah. So that I don't want you to feel, and the other one that we're going to be talking about, inshallah, is the gaze, the look next time, inshallah, Rabbil Alameen. So, yeah, let me know, inshallah. Go ahead. Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Barakallah fi. Mm-hmm. So the question is that if a person sets up structures like residences or hotels or motels for people just to simply use, and people come and they use them for zina, without his knowledge, right? So we say that there's nothing wrong with what he has done, because he did not set up those things for zina. If a person abuses something that you've created and it's an innocent thing, the sin is on them, not on the person who created that thing. If a person knows that this thing is going to be used only for that, then he wouldn't do it. Any pious person who knows, okay, it's in an area where no one is going to be there except those who are going to be committing zina, you wouldn't build it. But a typical, right, residence, a typical hotel, a typical motel, you're not responsible for what people do in that thing without your knowledge. Oh, okay, there's something I wanted to add. It's a good thing I remembered. Which is a shubha, right, about zina. And sometimes you get that. Which is that I don't see what is wrong with it if it's consensual. It's two consenting adults. What's wrong with it? And you hear this sometimes coming from Muslims. Right? I don't know what's wrong with it. It's just two consenting adults. Now, no, a reply to that shubha. First of all, that argument, if a person is making it, you have moved zina from being a disease of shahwa into a disease of shubha. So zina is a disease. If you just simply practice zina and you say it's haram and I know and it's wrong and I'm bad and this and I regret it, eventually I want to leave it, this is a disease of shahwa. If you start arguing that it is legitimate, nothing is wrong with it, you moved it from shahwa into shubha. Shubha is far more serious. Because this thing now you're messing with the Quran and the Sunnah. What is clear in the Quran and the Sunnah and consensus that is haram, now you start trying to mess with that. So that's far more serious. And you are trying to legitimize this, not only for yourself, because when you say I'm weak and one day I will repent, you're kind of giving yourself excuses. But hopefully one day you think you're going to repent. But when you say it's consensual, you're legitimizing this for everybody. So that is incredibly serious. So a reply to that shubha, you could be one of two people. A person who's just a very common Muslim. And you say to yourself, you know what? I don't know what nonsense you're talking about. I just know that it's haram. I know it's bad. That's enough for me. Done. That's a general refutation of that shubha. And that is adequate. That's suitable. If that's the only thing you need, that's enough. Right? Because not everybody, not every Muslim is supposed to know the refutation, detailed refutation of every shubha. Otherwise, that would be impossible. Imagine, right? Every shubha, every doubt, every misunderstanding, you need to know its refutation in detail. Do you? A farmer, a mechanic, everybody needs to know it in detail. Or is it enough for a person to know, Allah and the Prophet said this, I believe in that, what you're saying contradicts it, I know you're wrong. That's enough. But it's better, especially where you live and how people talk and how they exchange ideas, to know it in detail. So you'd say to yourself, if you're saying it's okay if it's consensual, right? I'll ask you a couple of questions. Are you saying that God cannot intervene in a consensual relationship to prohibit it? Does He have the right? Not, first of all, not that He did, but does He have the right? Two adults consenting, they want to do things together. Does Allah have the right to intervene and say, though you are consenting, I'm not going to let you? He has the right. Exactly, He does whatever He wants, subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's His creation. Did He do that? Yeah. Selling and buying. You can't just sell and buy whatever you want, right? Even a man and his wife, he's married. He says at this time you can't have intercourse with her. But we're consenting and we're adults and we could do whatever. No, you can't have. Ramadan, you can't. Right? She's menstruating, you can't. Right? Anally, you cannot. You cannot do just whatever you want. So we have in Islam something that would contradict this idea of two consenting adults doing whatever they want. But I say, okay, in addition to this, are you saying that the government cannot intervene to prohibit two adults consenting from doing whatever they want? Do you think that the government cannot or does not? And what do you think when the government intervenes to prohibit two adults in agreement of doing whatever they want together? So for instance, he wants to sell him drugs and he's well aware of it. Do you think the government should not intervene? Whatever that drug is. How about prostitution? Right? And you say, well, it's oppressive of women. And a woman comes and tells you, you know what, I'm making a lot of money. Don't interfere. Right? I'm rich. I want to do this. I'm not oppressed. What do you think? What do you think of somebody, what they call mercy killing? Or maybe it's not even about mercy. I don't want to live anymore. I'll pay you, you kill me. It's a transaction. I know exactly what I'm doing. He knows exactly what I'm doing. Do you want to allow that? So you will be in favor of a government coming and limiting consensual acts. And you know for sure that Allah Azza wa Jal comes down and He what? Limits consensual acts. So we don't borrow the reasoning from other people, because this is what? This is the language of the disbelievers. No, Allah Azza wa Jal, when He says there's something that is haram, it's haram. Right? And when something is halal, it's halal. So that principle of two consenting adults doing whatever they can as long as they are not harming each other, anybody else, that is what invalid in Islam. So I just wanted to answer that because it did come up. And I was hoping that if a person kind of had doubts about it, or was to encounter somebody with doubts about this, that they will be able, inshallah, to answer that. Inshallah. Tfaddali.
We know today Zina is everywhere. And even worse than the Zina is the people who are selling a man selling his sperm. And that sperm being put on millions, hundreds of women. So now what the Sheikh is saying, where the lineage is now broken, you don't know who is who. So then what's the ruling? How are you going to today? Because you don't know who is related to who was, and you even have, forget about the Zina, you have even women who are selling or donating their own milk. That means that child who gets that milk and now becomes a sibling. But yet no one, they think that they're doing something charitable. So how will Islam, as Muslims, how can we approach and make sure that we're not impacted by this fitna?
Naam, jazakallah. Right. So Brother Barakallah Fiqh, he's referring or pointing out another complication of what we talked about, which is the protection of lineage. So he's saying about sperm banks and how people will sell their sperm. And once that happens, you don't really know anymore who's related to whom, right? And you probably have seen some of these stories where people have, a person had fathered, I don't know, hundreds of kids. And they didn't know each other, and they just gradually found each other. So, and he's also talking about milk banks or something like that, where they donate the milk. And of course, you know, if you drink the same milk from the same woman enough times, you become brothers and sisters, and you cannot marry each other anymore. And so if that happens, that also spreads hurma, the impermissibility of marriage. And so people are marrying their sisters and they are marrying their brothers. So how do you avoid this? Well, first, or what do you say about it? Well, we already know by simply describing it as we've described it, that this is highly problematic and it is absolutely haram. When you try to figure out solutions to problems that you created by disobeying Allah Azza wa Jal, that's what you end up doing. You understand what I just said? These problems that they're trying to solve, where did they come from? But it's because you disobeyed Allah to begin with. Like if you stopped, it's a chain. Like trace it back and back and back. It began by disobeying Allah, which led to a problem. It led to another problem. You're trying to solve this by creating another problem, and so on and so on. So the way to do it is to go back to the origin of that problem and fix it. And when you fix this, you're not going to need men to donate their sperms. Why would they donate? Well, why are men donating their sperms other than them wanting money? I'm not talking about the men. Who's receiving this? Other than also infertile couples, because there's adoption. But also some of them are women who just simply want to have children without men. So where did this come from? That in itself is a problem. We haven't noticed it as a problem, right? And so go trace it, solve it from its inception. You're not going to need sperm banks. And the same thing, maybe, wallahu a'lam, right? The same thing with milk. Like, why did this happen? And if you go and trace it back, you may trace it back to the same problem as well. So if you go back, you'll understand that you cannot solve a problem with another problem, because it just compounds it, and you keep going on and on and on, and there is no end. Alhamdulillah, there is no end. It just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And you're in a maze and you cannot get out of it, because you refuse to admit that the original mistake is a mistake. It's not a mistake, and like zina is not a mistake. It's out of the question to say it's wrong, right? Abortion, it's out of the question to say it's wrong. Out. It's just a right. It has to be. I'm not talking about the exceptions. Exceptions are exceptions. I'm talking about it being a no. If you trace it back, you'll understand why. So that's how you approach it. By not engaging, by saying that it's wrong, by not replicating the mistake, but understanding from the mistakes of others. You've seen what is happening. And by the way, I'm not just saying west and east. Follow the same path, the same thing is going to happen to you. Like modernize without thought, without morality, this is what's going to happen to you. So even in Muslim countries today, the rate of divorce is what? High. Right? It's the same thing. If you don't guard yourself and guard your society, the same thing will happen to you. No. Let me see. I have a few questions here. What prevented the wicked son of Adam, the sinful son of Adam, from repenting? He didn't want to. Apparently, no. So we just know that he did not repent from it. Had he repented, Allah Azza wa Jal would not have put on him the burden of all consequent killings. But he did not repent. Wallahu a'lam. Tips on how to soften one's heart. That will take a lecture, but asking Allah Azza wa Jal for it, reading the Quran, visiting the graves, being around the sick and the orphans. These are things, inshallah, that will help. And, just reading the stories of the righteous, stories of the Salaf that have these softeners in them, inshallah. As I've mentioned that having 1 or 2 kids is not enough, why is that looked down upon? Nowadays, having a big family is very financially, mentally demanding. I'm not saying it's looked down upon. You understand what I said? So let me clarify. Did I say that having 1 or 2 kids is bad? No. I'm just saying, what did I say? I said in economics, you need to have more than 2 for their replacement. Right? So maybe, تفضل. Exactly. 2.4. Now, so on average, you could be fine. Like, for instance, if you had 1 or 2 and your neighbor had 6, hey, you've got you covered. So we're talking about average, right? So for some people, I understand, mentally, physically, financially, whatever, right? They can't. 1 is enough for them. 2 is enough for them. I'm not going to debate that with you. I'm just talking it in terms of what? Economics and in terms of demographics. That's it. That you will need to have more. So that means that, and again, for that to happen, think about it. Because this would revolutionize how not only Muslims, but also non-Muslims will think about it. If you want to have at least 3 children, that you plan in your head, that I want this family to have at least 3 children, what would that require? I mean, it requires marriage, because it typically doesn't happen outside of marriage, so it requires marriage. And you want also them to marry early, right? Because it's difficult to happen when the woman is late. And so you want them, and also you want the woman to be at home, to take care of the kids also. If you want to have a good family, just think about it. If you really want a healthy society, you have to have these things. At least part of the time, initially, especially when they're young, she has to be at home, not a working mom. No, at home. Not somebody else taking care of them, no, at home. So if you think about it, you have to revert to a traditional family and to a traditional society. But they'll never do it. Never do it, right? Because they will collapse before this happens. They will never do that. So I'm not saying, it's looked down upon, right? Inshallah. So I hope you understood me, right? How do we implement what we read in the Quran? You could do it gradually by simply taking one thing and trying to apply it. By looking at the Quran as a message, as a plan, as an action plan, let's say. Allah wants you to do this, and He now communicated this to you. So you take one thing and you apply it. And then hopefully, bi'idhnillah azza wa jal, once you start applying one, the next thing and the third thing and the fourth thing, inshallah, will just fall in line, bi'idhnillah azza wa jal. There's one here that I think I've missed. Naam, so it says, maybe this is a good lead into the next lecture, inshallah. So he says, as I'm wondering, why did you not promote masturbation as a better alternative? Because at the very least, it removes the desire and can be used as a tool in that regard. So, yani, masturbation is haram, as the scholars have said, right? And unless in extreme circumstances, the only thing that is stopping or between you and zina is that, and you can commit this, and then you're not going to commit zina, right? Then they will allow this as a lesser harm. But it's like you're at the end of it, right? You just that's the thing between you and zina. You're not just sitting at home and you're saying, yeah, well, you know, if I don't do this, I'll commit zina, might as well I do it. That's not it. You're actually right at the door. And that's the thing that's going to stop it. They say that you can do this instead of zina. But it is not a solution. That in itself is not a solution, right? And we're going to be talking about, when we talk about the gaze and protecting the eyes, inshallah Rabbil Alameen, next week, I'll mention this, why this is not a solution, inshallah Rabbil Alameen. Okay. You have any more questions? Fadl. Do you have a specific minor sin in mind, or just anything? Okay. So the question from the brother is that we mentioned that the great sins, especially the ones we talked about, like zina, destroys the fabric of society. Is it possible for minor sins to do the same? Or is this limited to major sins? Now, because this is major, its effect on that destruction or the type of destruction it causes is greater than the effect of a minor sin. The minor sin, from the name, it does not do as much damage. Now, if you keep adding the minor sins, one on top of the other, one next to the other, until there's a lot of them, then a lot of minor sins next to each other will lead also to a decay in society. Because a minor sin on top of another, on top of another, on top of another will lead to the major sin. So then it leads to that decay that we're talking about. So if the minor sins are spread and they amplify, thus they lead to this. But on its own, it cannot compare to the effect of a major sin. The major sin is much more destructive. Yeah. Inshallah, because I just read it, I just want to answer it, then I'll come to you, inshallah. You mentioned that in the Quran, it's mentioned that humans are created anxious. Do you recommend anything for people to stay level-headed besides having taqwa and making dua? Just look up the ayah in the Quran that mentions this, that they have been created anxious. إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ خُلِقَ هَلُوعًا. And then look at how Allah Azza wa Jal lists the exception, illa, except. And look at what makes the exception. That will be your prescription, bi'idhnillah Azza wa Jal, which includes salah, includes also taqwa, preserving your private parts, and everything that Allah Azza wa Jal has mentioned. In general, right, the greater your connection to Allah Azza wa Jal, the more level-headed, the more balanced you are, the more giving you are when you have, and the more relaxed and comfortable you are when you are touched by evil. So you're in the middle, neither on either extreme. But it requires an iman that grounds you. So if you follow the ayah, and in generally please Allah Azza wa Jal with Quran, with dua, with salah, with staying away from the haram, you will have a portion from that, bi'idhnillah Azza wa Jal. تفضل. نعم 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 نعم. The brother is saying, he's saying that in the West before, it was the case that the high wife would stay home and the man would go out work and earn enough money to bring back home. The wife did not have to work. He says, but today, one household income would not be enough. You need two to be working, to be able to make ends meet, to be able to survive, to stay afloat. So how can you apply this today? I'm not saying that it's easily applied today. I'm saying I was hoping that society as a whole, right, realizes the need to free women so that they would raise their children, and then there will be societal shifts where we will say to them, you know what, you stay at home and you take care of this, and maybe we could pay you instead of working outside. Maybe we could do this and that. Maybe we will increase the pay of your husband to include in it and factor in the fact that he's supporting you and supporting your children. So you don't need two parents working, but one is enough. But on our own, no. We can't do it on our own. You cannot really apply it on your own unless Allah Azza wa Jal blesses you somehow. But if there's a societal shift, just like when they say we need immigrants, that they break them, we need to increase minimum wage, and they do it, a shift like that kind of enables, right, the family to survive as a family. That's what it is. You had a question in the back? No. So, no. So you're saying, isn't it better, right, knowing what we know about the society and how it combats, right, what Allah loves, for us to go back home? I mean, I'm saying, you pray on it and then you ask Allah Azza wa Jal for it, and if a place opens itself to you, then why not? If you will find yourself to be more obedient to Allah Azza wa Jal in that place, then why not? Right? Why not? Right? That's what I can say.
Sheikh, kids born out of Zina without knowledge, do they share the punishment as in of Zina once it happens? Now you are born, your parents give birth to you out of Zina, you never knew. Are you entitled to Akika, and you fall into Allah's curse of the general world you live in as you are suffering because of your parents' Zina?
No. And we are going to talk about that, inshallah, because he will talk about it, bi'idhnillah azza wa jal. So, but in general, right, the question is about, does the child of Zina, does he suffer the consequences of the sins of his parents? He says no, he does not, right? Inshallah. It's because he's innocent, right? He didn't do anything to deserve it, so he's innocent of that, inshallah. Tfaddal. Okay, inshallah. Let me see if I can. Okay. What suggestions do you have for a husband who doesn't make enough to provide for his stay-at-home, wife taking care of a small child? So, what suggestion do you have for a husband who doesn't make enough to provide? So, doesn't make enough to provide for his wife and his small child. I mean, if the obstacle there is that he is unwilling to work or lazy or what have you, we just remind him of his responsibility that Allah Azza wa Jal did charge you with taking care of your wife and taking care of your husband, your wife and your child. So this is your obligation, okay? And if they are not provided for, who are you going to leave that to? This is your responsibility, and Allah Azza wa Jal will ask you about it. So I don't know the exact situation here, but some of us, subhanAllah, we don't take this seriously. And like some of us, and again, I don't know about this situation, some of us have not really matured. So we think we're still young, still kids, really. So we think that somehow this will be taken care of, my parents will take care of it, or what have you. No, once you assume responsibility, if I'm going to marry her, you're responsible for her. I'm going to have this child, I'm responsible for that child. And you do your best. It doesn't mean that, you're going to be rich, but you do your best. At least you've done your best. And Allah Azza wa Jalla will bless the rest. But don't sit back and say, I'm too tired, or I'm too lazy, or this or that, and make excuses. And your wife is suffering. The wife, who is your responsibility, is suffering, and your son is suffering. If you cannot take care of him financially, how will you be able to take care of him in other fields as well? Religiously, morally, right? Psychologically, how will you be there if you've neglected him in this very basic part that seems that a lot of people can manage? So if you even fail there, does this bode well for other areas as well, where you will neglect him and not take care of him? So just remind him of his responsibility. Make dua for him, right? Make dua for him, because you do not know how Allah Azza wa Jal can change people.
First of them is that collection of taxes in this general sense that we are used to in the world today is forbidden in our religion. I'm just wondering how the Islamic states in the past and how the Islamic state today be able to operate without that.
Okay, the second question?
The second question is that I'm seeing a sort of movement in some communities that they are arguing that in a debate like this, there shouldn't be a divider between the men's section and the women's section. They're saying because it helps increase focus and stuff like that. But the evidence that they're trying to use is that the Prophet's Mosque, alayhi salatu wasalam, at the time didn't have it. So the answer to that as well.
Okay, inshallah. So the first question is about taxes and how countries today depend on taxes for revenue. And he says, we understand that this is problematic Islamically. How did the an Islamic government in the past and in the present, how will it be able to finance itself? So we know that there's a collection of zakah, and the zakah will go towards many of the needs of society, whether we're talking about individuals or this country will take it and use that zakah to support this and support this and support that. The country itself also, and I don't claim to have a full and complete answer to that question, but the country itself also will have Baytul Mal, right? The treasury. And that treasury will also be fed by an income that comes from lands, let's call it like federal land that people will have today. Lands that it could rent, or lands that could be used in farming and what have you, and these things could be invested, and then that will go into the Muslim treasury. So it will have its own revenue, and it will spend from that revenue bi'idhnillah, without the need for a lot of taxes. Taxes remain as an exception. That is, when the state has nothing and it is truly in need, it can impose taxes only as much as it needs, and then it should stop. So that is kind of a very short, limited answer to your question, because it's definitely not my field, right? The other question that you had is about some may prefer in a class like this, in a lesson like this, to remove the barrier between men and women because it helps the sisters to focus. But you say that the evidence that they cite for this is the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ that had no barrier. Now, of course, equating the salat to a class, right, is an equation with difference, an analogy with difference. That's a particular type of ibadah, and this one is not an obligation, and it's not the particular form or a particular form or a similar form of ibadah. So if a person were to argue that this and this should happen in the salah, it doesn't necessarily mean that it should happen in a class, or it should happen in a course or in a lecture. It doesn't mean that it is necessarily wrong not to have a barrier, but some masjids choose this and some masjids choose that. The benefits of a barrier, let's say the pros and cons of a barrier. The pros of a barrier is that it does give the females privacy, right? So for some sisters, let's say for instance, who want to wear the niqab, they don't have to wear the niqab while they are secluded. For some sisters who want to be comfortable when they sit, they cannot do that if they are in the presence of men. So it does give them their own privacy. They can come in, they can come out, they can converse if they wish. Does it impede focus? Maybe or maybe not. Like if you really want to focus, especially with the technology, you're able to focus. If you don't want to focus, you're not going to focus even if you're sitting here. The advantage of it also of seclusion, and I'm going to say it's the perfect solution, but the advantage of having a barrier is that you don't have to monitor every single female who comes into the masjid not dressed properly with hijab and what have you, right? So if we understand, or if we know that all of the women, all the sisters who come in terms of their hijab, in terms of not wearing makeup, in terms of not having perfume, they come in and it's perfect, alhamdulillah, you could say there's minimal fitna. But it's not always the case. So there'll be some sisters there who will come with all of these things. That seclusion kind of what does what? It kind of prevents that fitna from happening. Otherwise, you would have to go and continuously say, sisters, your hijab, sisters, makeup, sisters, perfume, sisters, this, which becomes cumbersome really with time. So that's about the class that I can speak to. The barrier between men and women, Wallahu alam, again, it depends on benefit and harm. So some will say yes, but remember, yes, no barrier, but also remember that let's say in masjids that have no barrier, what happens immediately after they finish the salah? The women remain seated in their area, right? They don't leave. Whereas if you go to the practice of the Prophet ﷺ, once the salah, no barrier, right? Once the salah is done, the women leave the masjid. They don't stay. So the Prophet ﷺ would ask them, stay as you are. So let's suppose we're here. We finish the salah, the women are behind, no barrier. He says, stay as you are, facing the qibla until the women leave. And they leave, and then they would turn around. So that's what you would need to do. And that's what to minimize contact. So if a person does not have, or the masjid does not have the barrier, they have to do something like that in order to be exactly like the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ, right? Not do what? Allow the women to be seated. So men, as they leave and they enter, they have full view of women, right? So that's the difference between it. Allah. And don't take it personally, right? If you disagree with this, fine, you could disagree. No, I'm not talking about you generally, right? Because I'm speaking to an audience that I cannot see. So if you don't like it, you say, okay, different opinion, alhamdulillah, fine.
The question was going to be for anyone who is thinking to have a family or has a family, what would be the best resource you can suggest for helping parents with tarbiyah, to give their children tarbiyah?
So what is the best resource to help children with the tarbiyah of their children?
Yes, or to become better at this with their children.
Naam. So I'm just trying to think of books, because I know that there are books in Arabic that talk about the rights of the children, the tarbiyah of the children, but I don't know how many of them are translated. So if any of those books are translated, or if you know of them that are translated, that would be the thing that you go to, because they will tell you how the Prophet ﷺ dealt with the children, dealt with the Hassan, dealt with Hussein, dealt with Fatima, the hadith about children, about, for instance, teaching them salah, and what does that mean, and how that is being a model. So they will collect all of this and then convey it. I'm just trying to, I don't remember a particular resource in English at this point, but maybe it's available, and that we have something. I'll contribute, inshallah. Naam. صح, that's true. Okay. Okay, so there's some books, inshallah, you say by Rida Bashir, in English, inshallah. Barakallah fiqh. So that's something in English. I'm not fully aware of everything that is in English. I know the titles or some of the titles in Arabic, but I don't know them in English, inshallah. And in general, inshallah, listen to lectures that would address this. Read, especially in the Sunnah, things that are related to children and how the Prophet dealt with them and how he said how to deal with them and how to teach them, how they should dress, how they should be separated, etc., as they get older. All of these things. So read it in the Sunnah. It will form a basis, inshallah, of understanding, and then the rest of what he recommended, inshallah, may be helpful. Barakallah fiqh. Okay, inshallah. Tfadl. Okay. A final answer, no. He's talking about the levels of paradise. So we have, is it just 100 levels? Or is it as the Prophet ﷺ said to the reciter of the Quran, read and elevate, because your station will be at the last ayah that you will read. He says, do we have final answers? He says, we can say that both of these things are compatible. So a person, there are two vast 100 ones, and you will continue to be elevated between these levels, between the 2, 1 and 1, and then between 1 and 2, 2 and 3, and then 3 and 4, and what have you. So the ultimate ones are 100, or they exceed 100. I don't know at this moment of a final answer about the levels of Jannah, wallahu a'lam. And 10 levels. Yeah, the same thing. The same thing. So, you had something? I'm sorry. Okay. Alaykum salam wa rahmatullah. Mhm. Okay, so it's about free mixing with cousins. Okay, relatives. So if we're talking about cousins, and so, or anyone who's called a relative that you're allowed to marry, then this is not a mahram. So mahram, you will need to keep a distance from them. So you're not allowed to touch them. You're not to be alone with them. You don't engage in unnecessary talk with them, especially soft or jokingly. You stay in a distance, respectful distance. So that becomes challenging when the family expects you to mix in a free way, because they think, well, there are no barriers between you, just like brother and sister, they just one big family. It becomes problematic to assert the Islamic outlines or the Islamic limits. And so what you need to do is educate and teach and tell them about halal and haram, what Allah loves and what Allah hates, and then maintain that difference. So you're not going to sit on the same table eating with your cousin. There has to be a distance. You're not going to be alone with them. You're going to be sitting in the same living room next to her talking about this and that. There has to be separation and segregation. Because if you don't do that, then you could easily fall into fitna. And the fact that, well, I grew up with her, that's not enough a reason or deterrent for the fitna not to happen. So a distance, right? Just as you would, deal with any other sister outside who is not really related to you. You are allowed to marry her and you are allowed to marry this woman. You treat them similarly, inshallah. Yeah, inshallah.
Sheikh, there are three things that the Prophet ﷺ told us when it's their time due, we have to go for them. And one of them is when the person is ready for marriage, is to go for marriage. What advice do you give to those youth there who are shy and indeed you can't go in front to date a lady or for marriage or propose? The same applies to the lady.
So they are shy?
Yeah, they are shy, and I know shyness is part of deen. Then the second question is, Sheikh, do you relate the high rate of zina when I look at the Arab world compared to their currency that it normally doesn't depreciate compared to the Western currencies? Do we affiliate that to oil as economics say, or to me, I understand that is the high rate of zina brings the current depreciation higher level. But when you look at the countries like Alhamdulillah, Kuwait, their dinar doesn't depreciate due to zina and interest, but compared to the Western world.
So the second question first, it says, do you relate the stability of a currency in a Muslim country to the fact that zina is not widespread versus the fluctuation of a currency because of zina that is widespread in that country? You would need an economist also to answer that question, because you can't simply isolate zina as the only factor. Because somebody will come and say, no, they did not, because as you mentioned, there is oil, there is reserve, there is this and that, while this other country has this other problems. So sometimes the religious reasons are not the visible reasons. It is there and it's causing something, but it is indirect. So it's hard to relate this to that unless you have faith. But how do you prove it on paper? That could be difficult for someone, right, who doesn't believe in these things. Plus other factors could complicate that. So when you come specifically and comparing this country to that country, you would need an in-depth study of both countries where you would notice, let's call it a implicit, hidden reason, and you cannot account for it, and then you will say there's barakah or there's lack of barakah, right? The other one, the question that you had, which is if a person is shy, your recommendation for approaching? Like how do you initiate, how you talk about it and what have you, which is interesting, because the question here is it haram to not ever get married or have kids? marriage is not an obligation unless you're afraid of falling into haram. Then it becomes an obligation. Otherwise, it's a sunnah, right? So if you say I don't want to get married, you don't have to get married, right? But if you get married, then one of the objectives, one of the reasons that people get married is to have children. So you cannot say I'm not going to have children, because A, it contradicts the cause of marriage or the reason for marriage, or one of the main reasons for marriage, and then the right of your spouse. The spouse also has a right, male or female, to have children. So if you say no to them, you have denied them their right and contradicted the reason for marriage. So that's the question to this. So you think about it and think about the reasons rather than ask this. Ask yourself, why is it that I don't want to get married? And ask yourself, why is it that I don't want to have kids? And then let's deal with that. So maybe that, inshallah, could be overcome. You want to add something to this? Oh, okay. No, I'm not to you. I'm talking to you. Okay. So your question is that if you're shy, how do you overcome your shyness? Maybe by mediating somebody. So it's not you, but somebody else. So it's the parents, it's the friend, it's an older brother, it's somebody that you trust and that you know who could act on your behalf. And then pushing yourself, despite discomfort, beyond your shyness. Saying, I mean, this is something that Allah Azza wa Jalla loves. And if I'm not going to be shy, just like commanding good and forbidding evil, speaking out against evil, you're going to be shy and not say it just because you're shy, then the world will collapse. When you say, despite the fact that I'm shy, I still have to speak the truth, I still have to tell them that this is wrong. Despite the fact that I'm shy, Allah loves this, okay, push yourself and do it. And you'll overcome that shyness with Allah Azza wa Jal. So if it's hard in the beginning, people will help you, inshallah. You just ask for that help. The last question, inshallah, is this. So a business venue or a business idea, let's say, where if you're going to open a business and there's going to be free mixing, like in a cafe, like in a playing what? Pool and whatever. Bowling, right? So is it my responsibility, etc., etc.? If you want to open a business, you want to make sure that it's not going to be used for that. There's a difference between a business that is halal and somebody takes something from it and they use haram, use it for haram. Or something that when it's open, you know that's going to be used mostly for something that Allah does not like, which is what, like in a cafe. People are going to come and they will free mix. People are going to come and they're not going to separate. And you're not going to be able to enforce a separation. You won't be able to, right? It'd be illegal. So what do you say then? You say, then I'm not going to open something like this. Restaurant is different, right? Restaurant is different. But a cafe typically, right, what happens is that people come and they usually are young and they sit together and da-da-da-da. Restaurant, whoever wants to come, let them come and eat, right? Right? And you see families coming there. You see this, but it's usually, the cafe usually caters to the young. It usually caters to those who are not married. So if you think that it's going to be mostly, right, unless what you open is what? A drive-through or something that is takeaway. They come and they leave. They come and they leave. That's an easy option. So then you don't have to really contend with the fact that they are sitting and there's mixing and there's this and haram is taking place under my roof. No. Take out and that's easy, inshallah. Okay. We're good? Okay. Barakallahu feekum. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin.